Hello, Otumoetai Church. I come to you, not live. I'm pre-recorded again, and I'm heavily edited, and I'm on my blurry camera again. I keep forgetting how bad this camera is. It's my webcam on my laptop, but I didn't know it was this bad. But I need it because it makes the editing so much easier because I can record and then it goes straight into the software that I'm using and it just makes things 10 times easier. So if I get brought up about this Monday morning at the preacher's meeting, I already told you this is the reason. Okay. I don't actually know what's worse, when you preach in front of people in person or you pre-record it on a camera, because I just know I'm going to end up doing 1,000 retakes until I'm happy. Maybe you could ask me after you've listened to this what I prefer, and I'll be able to tell you. But we'll cross this bridge first and see what happens. Today I'm going to be taking a character out of the book of Genesis and speaking about him. Genesis is probably my favorite book in the Bible, and if you've been around me long enough, you're more than likely to hear me bang on about it, just because I love it so much. Mr. Jonathan Ashley has his favorite book, which is Hebrews, and sometimes it can be hard to get him out of the book of Hebrews, and I think I'm that way with Genesis. And as you read the book of Genesis, you're confronted with so many different characters, the main ones being Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, but the one that I want to talk about today is Joseph. And he can be found first mentioned in chapter 37. There's 50 chapters in the book of Genesis, and Joseph covers 13 of them. So how am I going to talk about 13 chapters of Joseph in this lesson? I'll do my best. I'm assuming that most people who are listening to this are probably already pretty familiar with Joseph and his story. But for the ones who aren't, I'll try my best to paint a clear picture of who Joseph is and what happened to him. There's so many lessons that can be learned from Joseph and his story, but the main theme that I would like to get across this morning is forgiveness. I think that if 99.99% of people went through what Joseph went through, forgiveness would not be on the radar. But Joseph was very different. Joseph was a Christ-like figure who did what he thought God wanted him to do in all situations. You can't find sin in Joseph. You could make the argument that he was a bit naive as a young boy, but all throughout his life, his story, he remained faithful to God. So let's begin and see who Joseph is. Well, starting in chapter 37, we can see that Joseph is one of 12 brothers, and he was the youngest brother. Chapter 37 verse 2 reads, Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. So basically, to put that in a way that we could understand it today, he was out working in a field with his brothers, and he, the younger brother, didn't think his older brothers were doing a very good job. So he went and snitched on his older brothers to daddy. And there's a saying, a very common saying in the world, that snitches get stitches, and boy did Joseph get some stitches. Verse 3-4 of chapter 37 reads, Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So we see from this that there was favoritism from Jacob, who's called Israel in this verse. And you could say for sure that Jacob was definitely out of line by having a favorite son. I can't say too much more about having favorite kids because I have yet to have any kids of my own to have that experience. But I'm sure as many of you are already well aware, it's probably not a good thing to choose favorites because it causes resentment in the other siblings. Joseph also had dreams, and he decided to share these dreams with his brothers who already hated him. Verse 6 reads in chapter 37, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, 'Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?' And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said." Verse 9 continues, "Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. 'Listen,' he said, 'I had another dream. And this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me.'" So Joseph is talking a very big game here. And this is where I think the naivety of Joseph comes into play as a young boy. He's saying things that are technically true, but these are just metaphoric dreams for the future. And these dreams do come true. He's not telling lies with his dreams, but I think it would definitely be wise. Maybe just keep your dreams to yourself for the time being, because unbeknownst to him, he's ignorantly rubbing his brothers the wrong way and making them actually hate him. Now, I'll just make it clear that what happens to Joseph is completely unjust, and he does not deserve anything that is about to happen to him simply because he snitched on his brothers. He's the favorite son, and he's sharing his dreams with them where he will one day rule over them. Okay, he doesn't deserve anything that happens to him because of those three reasons. Here's how I'll sum up Joseph in his youth. He was a goody two-shoes who just didn't quite know how to interact with others in total humility at that point of his life. But he wasn't deliberately committing any sin either. So back to the scriptures. So one day, Joseph is getting ready to do some more work, and his brothers are already out in the field putting in work. So he goes out there to look for them, and he approaches a man, and verse 16 onwards in chapter 37 reads, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Joseph had one brother who did actually try and stick up for him at this point, and he did say, "Don't kill him. Let's just throw him down the well and leave him there." And he said this with the intent of going back later to actually rescue Joseph and bring him back to his father Jacob. So they weren't all bad, but it still turned out pretty bad. But the story continues on in verse 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, there was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." So what's going on here? They throw their youngest brother Joseph down a well to leave him for dead, and then sit down next to the well and have a meal. And then one of the brothers, Judah, suggests maybe it's not such a good idea to kill him. He's our little brother after all. Let's just sell him into slavery instead, as if that's more moral of a thing to do. And Reuben tries to come back to rescue Joseph from the well, but Joseph's not there. Reuben was the oldest brother, and he figured that the best way to cover it up would be to take Joseph's robe that his father had given him, dip it in goat's blood, and then bring it back to their father Jacob to make up the lie that Joseph has been eaten by some wild animal. They definitely wouldn't get away with that in today's society. Investigators, I think, would be very quick to figure out that the blood that was used is not actually human blood, and it's come from a goat. But this was thousands of years ago, so the technology didn't exist back then. And Jacob believed his sons that Joseph has been eaten by an animal, when in reality he's been sold off into slavery. Now, I'll make this point. I think a lot of the time, when people read the Bible, especially stories like this, they have a fictional mindset. There's a bit of a disconnect that if we were to see a story like this on the news today, it would be a huge story. There would be just total outrage for the brothers and what they've done to their little brother Joseph. Like, this is sick. This is evil, what they've done. And to give you a perspective of Joseph's mindset as he's being betrayed by his older brothers, we can see a little bit later into Genesis, when his brothers start to encounter problems of their own. Chapter 42, verse 21 reads, "They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us." So Joseph, he was begging his brothers not to do this to him. He actually thought that they were joking in the beginning, and he's down in the well, and he's looking up, and he's saying, "Hey guys, joke's over. Can you please let me up now so I can eat?" And it just slowly starts to dawn on him that his brothers are being serious, and we're given this picture of him like bawling his eyes out, crying, as he's being taken away to a life of slavery, and his brothers could care less. I mean, could you just imagine if something like this happened to you? You were betrayed by people who you thought loved you. This is really an act of evil, and how could you ever forgive people that would do this to you? But as we will see, Joseph was different. And what follows on from this event is just a remarkable example of God's providence. Not once anywhere do we see Joseph display any bitterness to what has happened to him. And we know from the scripture that he's not happy necessarily with what has happened to him, and doesn't want to be in the situation he's in, but he's not resentful either, any shape or form. Now, after Joseph is taken away, he gets taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelites who paid for him. And he's actually sold again to a man named Potiphar, who was an Egyptian man and one of the chief officials to King Pharaoh. So this was a wealthy man with very high status. And we see from Genesis 39 verse 2 that while Joseph is in the captivity of this Egyptian man Potiphar, the Lord is with him. It reads, "The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care, with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate." So this is another theme throughout Joseph's story, that while God is not the one responsible for Joseph being betrayed, He was with him in every single situation he found himself in, and blessed him as much as he could. Because God is good like that. Verse 6 to 7 in Genesis 39 reads, Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, Come to bed with me. That's pretty straightforward if you ask me. It's obviously going to be a huge temptation for most men, but what does Joseph do? He turns her down. He says to her in verse 9, No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And this was a very, very persistent woman. She was extremely relentless in her pursuit of Joseph, constantly trying to pursue him. Verse 10 to 12 reads, And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, Come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. Now, I'm sure this woman was probably very attractive, and she can't understand why Joseph is rejecting her offer all the time. Her pride has been hurt, and now she has to get some revenge on Joseph. So what does she do? She takes the cloak that Joseph left behind when he ran out of the house, and she just makes up a flat lie and says basically Joseph tried to force himself on her, but she rejected him and screamed for help. She then goes to her husband Potiphar and says to him, That Hebrew slave you bought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. It's a blatant lie. And when Potiphar hears about it, he believes everything, and he's furious with Joseph, believes every word that his wife says without question. And he has poor Joseph wrongly put in jail for doing nothing wrong but honoring his master, Potiphar, and honoring God. And I'll just mention the first verses that follows Joseph being wrongly thrown in jail are verses 20 to 23 in chapter 39. Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was in there, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So once again, Joseph is betrayed, taken advantage of, mistreated, simply for doing the right thing. But as we see again, the Lord was with him. And it wasn't an ideal situation for Joseph to be in, obviously, but he's still able to work in just horrible situations such as this one. Now, moving forward in Joseph's story, as I said in the beginning, trying to squeeze 13 chapters into one lesson is not totally possible. But I do want to do my best to paint a picture of the situations that Joseph finds himself in. And I'm sure most people are familiar with the cupbearer and the baker, and you could do an entire lesson off of this chapter, but we haven't got time for that. What's important to know is Joseph he's wrongfully in jail, and two different people join him in there. One was a cupbearer, and the other was a baker for the king of Egypt. And these two people have been put there because they are under investigation for potentially trying to kill the king of Egypt, or Pharaoh is his other name. And these two people have a dream, their first night in prison, and each dream had a meaning of its own. And neither the cupbearer or the baker knew how to interpret their dreams, and this was upsetting them. But then Joseph comes along and he says to them in chapter 40, verse 8, Do not interpretations belong to God? tell me your dreams. Chapter 40, verse 9 to 11 reads, So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. Joseph's interpretation of this dream from the cupbearer is, he says to him, hey, look, in 3 days it's going to be all good. You're going to be restored to your original position as cupbearer for Pharaoh, and life goes on. And the cupbearer, he's overjoyed at this news, and Joseph just asks him, he says to him, when you do get restored back to your original position to be with Pharaoh again, could you please just remember to tell him about me and how I've been wrongfully put in jail? That was his only request. The baker hears Joseph's interpretation for the cupbearer, and he's like, hey, that sounds pretty good. I've got a dream, Joseph. Here's my dream. Chapter 40, verse 16 to 17 reads, On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Okay, what's Joseph's interpretation here? Well, here's your interpretation, Mr. Baker. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. You're very welcome, Mr. Baker, for the interpretation. Joseph didn't say that, but I'm just putting it in there anyway. And we know what happens. Everything that Joseph said would happen came true. The cupbearer was restored. The baker was brutally killed by Pharaoh. So what ends up happening after all of this? Well, now Pharaoh is having some dreams in the following chapter, and he doesn't have anyone he knows that can interpret them for him. And he sends for magicians. He sends for wise men all over Egypt, but nobody could give him the proper interpretation of his dreams. And then what happens? The cupbearer remembers Joseph and tells Pharaoh about him. He says to him, there was a guy in prison. I had a dream and I didn't know what to make of it, but this guy interpreted it for me and it came true. Everything he said came true. So what happens? Pharaoh sends for Joseph, pulls him out of prison and says, hey Joseph, I have a dream for you to interpret. And there's a line that I really love in chapter 41 verse 16. It says, I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. And what's he saying there? Well, he's saying, hey Pharaoh, this is not my power. God is the one who is giving you these dreams, and I'm just the vessel that he's using to give you the answer that you desire. So when you do get the interpretation that you want, Pharaoh, I don't want any glory for it. You give it all to God. That is what Joseph is basically saying to him. And it's such an important principle that I think every Christian should have. It's not our power. When God does things through us, it's not our power. It's all God. So let's not claim any glory for ourselves. Give it all to God. But to cut a story short, I don't have to read out Pharaoh's dreams this morning, but Joseph's interpretation for Pharaoh's dreams are, look, Pharaoh, God is sending these dreams to you because you're about to have 7 years of abundance and prosperity in the land of Egypt, but then this will be followed by 7 years of severe famine. So you need to prepare now or face the destruction of Egypt. And Pharaoh believes every word that Joseph says and starts planning. He makes the proper preparations to ensure Egypt can survive the oncoming famine. And of course, once again, everything that Joseph says comes true because God is working through him. And Pharaoh, he's so impressed with Joseph, he makes him second in command over the entire nation of Egypt. And that's a huge deal because Egypt was the powerhouse of the entire world during this time period, thousands of years ago. And it is just another example of God blessing Joseph despite all the horrible betrayals that he's been through. God has been with him the whole time and has a plan. And I'm including all this scripture. You might be wondering, where am I going with this? I'm including it all because we're setting up for something special. This all leads into one of the most powerful moments in the Bible, in my opinion. That's 7 years of famine that God let Pharaoh know was going to happen. That included all areas of Egypt, all the other areas around Egypt, but Egypt was prepared for it. Joseph's brothers were under that same famine, and they were in desperate need of food. So where else should they go but Egypt? And guess who's in charge? None other than Joseph. Alright, who's in charge when they get there? None other than Joseph. They didn't recognize him at first, and he made them jump through all sorts of hoops before he eventually revealed himself to them. And how do you think he acted when he revealed himself to them? What was he like? I took some pictures, and here's what I'd like to do if I was in Joseph's position and had brothers that tried to kill me, and they sell me into slavery, and now here they are on my doorstep begging me for food. Let these pictures speak 1,000 words. I say, boom! I'm the king now. You guys threw me down a well, then sold me into slavery. I was falsely accused of attempting to assault a woman and thrown into prison for years. You lied to my dad, and you told him I was eaten by some wild animal. You guys made my life miserable, and now you want food to survive. I'm the king now. Away with you peasants. Good riddance. You're getting nothing out of me. How about this? Where's my servants? Take these guys away and throw them in prison, and then for a week from now, let's impale them on a pole, like what happened to that baker that tried to kill Pharaoh. I reckon that'd be pretty funny. Fortunately, Joseph was a bit different, and he meets them with tears, and he forgives them instantly. And he tells them, what you intended for evil, God meant for good. He did it to accomplish what is being done now, the saving of many lives. And we see a scene where they all embrace each other, and Joseph gives absolutely everything to them, no strings attached. He gives them absolutely everything. And he says, do not feel guilty that you sold me into slavery. It was for a purpose. It's amazing. It's crazy. No forgiveness like it. He's a Christ-like figure who honored God the whole entire way through his journey. I want to play a video of a man called Gary Ridgway, who's known as the Green River Killer. And he was a serial killer who's on the record for killing 48 people. Well, he did end up getting caught, and back in 2001, he's under trial for all his crimes. He was guilty, obviously. They convict him very quickly. And this video is of him being confronted by the victims' family members, loved ones. And rightfully so, they're saying all sorts of horrible things to him and condemning him, telling him he's going to burn in hell. But then there's another man who gets up and he has a different take. And he says something quite special. And this is a powerful, powerful moment that I've seen live of forgiveness. Let's have a watch.
On November 5th, 2003, all doubt of Ridgway's guilt was erased. He pleaded guilty to the murders of 48 women. He'd made a deal to cooperate with the prosecution to provide more information on his victims and the whereabouts of their remains. In doing so, he avoided a trial and possible death penalty.
Mr. Ridgway, how do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree as charged in count 1 for the death of Wendy Lee Caulfield?
Guilty.
How do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree as charged in count 2?
Guilty. Guilty. Guilty.
It's like he didn't have any remorse at all for what he had done. You know, he'd killed so many people, he didn't remember who they were, what they looked like. I just couldn't believe that somebody could kill all those people and not remember them.
Neither could the angry relatives of his victims, who were invited to speak in court when Ridgway was sentenced to life without parole on December 18, 2003.
You had said your memory, when it comes to all of the women you took, was gone. Our memory is not. In your words, you said that they didn't mean anything to you, but she meant everything to us.
She was a mother, she was a wife, she was a sister, and we miss her.
Gary Ridgway sat there stone-faced as victims' relatives damned him and mocked him.
He's an animal. I wish for him to have a long, suffering, cruel death.
He's gonna go to hell, and that's where he belongs.
But then the emotionless facade finally cracked when the father of one of his victims appeared to surprise him with a dose of human kindness.
Mr. Ridgway, there are people here that hate you. I'm not one of them. You've made it difficult to live up to what I believe, and that is what God says to do, and that's to forgive. You are forgiven, sir.
Those tears and a statement he made to the court later that day were as close to showing real remorse as Gary Ridgway had ever come.
We can refer to the portrayal of Joseph by his brothers as being thrown down into the pit. Me personally, I have experienced a situation where people threw me into the pit, and it was a while ago now, but I was a part of a community of people for a long time, and one day I stumbled across something I wish I hadn't seen. I caught 2 individuals stealing from this community that I was in. And from that day forth, now that I had dirt on them, I guess, I was a threat to them. And they put a target on my back. And they made it their mission to just get rid of me, to protect themselves. And they started making things up about me. They discredited me. They turned people I'd known for years against me. And I ended up basically looking like the one who was stealing. And I was the one that got kicked out of the group, out of the community. And I did nothing wrong. And when it happened, I just said, all right, that's it. I'm gone. I don't need to defend myself. And that wasn't easy to do. And I didn't go through anywhere near what Joseph went through when he was betrayed. But for a solid year, I had so much resentment to the people who betrayed me, and I was constantly going back on their social media. I was looking into the group to see if they'd been found out yet, and I just wanted them to get caught so badly so that I could be vindicated. You know, I wanted justice, and it just dominated my thinking. It was bad. And finally, after about a year and a half of that, God got me to the point where I could just move on from it. The only way forward was to forgive them, without them even asking for it. And still to this day, they never have apologized, but it doesn't bother me anymore. I'm able to look at Joseph and the way he acted, and I realize that I can literally forgive anyone for anything. Maybe not instantly, like Joseph could, but I can forgive anyone for anything through the power of God, and it sets me free. Forgiveness is freedom. Unforgiveness just brings bitterness, and it will poison you. It will come between you and God and have an effect on how you interact with others, how you minister to them. So that's my challenge to you this morning. Maybe you have a person or people in mind who threw you into the pit, and you're still holding on to that unforgiveness. And you want to forgive them and move on, but you're struggling. I just say, use Joseph as an example. Through the power of God, you can forgive them. It will set you free. Otumoetai, I love you, miss you, and hopefully we will be back under one roof sooner rather than later. Thank you and goodbye.